I was born in Minsk in Belarus, and I moved to Germany 16 or 17 years ago, and I traveled all around Germany for a while. And then after that, I said Germany is a bit boring, so yeah, let's explore. And I was traveling for 2 years everywhere, and now located in Vilnius, Lithuania. So I almost forgot Russian, by the way. This is a fun fact about me, because when I moved, I desperately tried to learn German, and I tried to succeed in that. And so it meant that I wouldn't speak Russian at all, so I almost forgot it, which was a really stupid thing of me to do. And then I recovered it because of my girlfriend, which is wonderful. So this gives me a unique opportunity to speak in Russian and in English and in German and understand Polish. Because, why? Because when I was, this is a totally different topic. When I was growing up in Belarus, my father set up a satellite dish which would pick up a signal from a TV nearby, from a hotel nearby, which is why I watched all the seasons of Knight Rider and Friends in Polish. So I understand Polish really well. But today we're not talking about it. We're talking about no signal. No signal, yes, no signal is a very fantastic new feature in CSS. It allows you to control, but this is a talk about our story. The big story of how we went from what we used to have 2.5 years ago to what we have now. And it's really been a very long story because we started talking and speaking or discussing it probably like 2.5 years ago. And I've never been in a project that took 2.5 years. That was like, and it wasn't like a full-time thing all the time, but it was really quite of an effort to move from this to this. And this is kind of, and if you don't like red, by the way, which is very uncommon in Russia, I think, you will be able to switch it off, right? And I want to cover 4 things today, kind of tell you all this story about what happened, including the no signal feature in CSS, right? And more specifically, talking about 4 things: the design, the front end, the back end, and the things we still have to do. And I know that most of you are developers, I guess, but I think it's important to kind of cover a little bit of design to give you some context of why we did certain things in a certain way. And then diving into front end, and then diving into back end side of things. Okay? And so we'll start with design, and specifically I want to kind of go back a little bit to give you some context of what the hell we were thinking, because this is a question I'm getting a lot. I'm getting a lot of emails, quite frankly, where people really get confused or mad or annoyed or just brutally saying just really brutal things to me sometimes. And I want to explain some things. So this is like the part when I talk about design, I want to talk about visual design, but just for a moment. Just for a moment. And specifically, I think that there is a problem when we think about creativity, when we think about the process and the workflow and the tooling and the way we all communicate and we work together. It seems like it's very misaligned in many ways. Right? It has to deal with personality, but not personality of people who are doing it, but the personality of an experience that we're creating. Right? So can you think of any website today or web application, except the one that you're building right now, that was so memorable that you still think of it as of today? Or that you can still remember today? Which one?
The one I built.
Yes, this doesn't count. The one you built didn't count. Here's another one. Should websites be memorable? Should web applications be memorable?
I remember Seattle's Space Needle landing page.
Okay, maybe some of you will remember some pages. And I'm wondering, why is it that most of us do not remember websites? Are they not important? Are we creating just some invisible artifact that are not really serving any purpose? So I asked myself that question, and specifically asked myself, why is it that it's seen this way? And I think that the design process, and I'm not talking about design, it could be the development process, the framework, the building, everything, is really complicated because we have to deal with people and systems, which are often weird and complicated. And this is how, like, the view that I'm getting most of the time, the creative process. Again, be it coding, designing, doesn't matter. You start somewhere, right? At some point, you start and go, and you iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate and keep going until you hit the finish line. But for us as designers or developers, it's not what it looks like at all. Because very often we start somewhere and we explore and we diverge and we explore very different options and scenarios until we hit that point where you think, oh, this looks promising. I should kind of keep going on it, right? And then you keep going, and then you hit a dead end, and then you have to reroute and recover from it and move on. And this is where we lose time. And the reason why we're losing time is because, well, we just don't know what to do, right? And this is why we tend to rely on things that used to work in the past. right? Which is why we tend to use design patterns or front-end patterns of things that, keep working. And some of you might have seen this in like a couple of months ago. Which one of these two possible websites are you building today? The one on the left or the one on the right? Because there is nothing else. This is it, right? There is one on the left and there is one on the right, and the difference sometimes is a placement of a carousel, right? Which is sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom. And I think that very often we're so, like designers specifically, are so obsessed with all those pixels. Like how many of you were involved in this discussion? So let's move border radius from 14 pixels to 12. Right? So, and then 1 month later, 13. Right? And does it really matter? Is it really important? Maybe we're losing the big picture kind of. If you look into the evolution of this interface here, right on the left, 30 freaking years. And it hasn't changed much except border radius and a couple of icons here and there. Maybe we need to make a bigger leap. And we talk about the 67 shades of blue on Google, like how they tested all the different shades of blue of the link to make sure that the traffic is good enough. Well, we're not talking about the much, much more superior 228 shades of icons on Facebook application. But it tests every single thing and every single round and every single thing. And they have this kind of tradition of introducing a new variation every day and then measure how well it performs. And I really don't like A/B testing at all. I like AZ testing, where you test very different things. And of course, we'll be testing like different wording and things like that. But I think we should be we're kind of losing the big picture here as well. Like this is just ridiculous. And we also tend to get lost in trends. Like how many of you had this conversation with a designer in your team? Oh, iPhone X, we're screwed. They had the thing at the top. This is going to ruin everything. This is the end of the way we see websites, right? But it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We tend to kind of think about these trends being so important. It's not so important because 98% of people, when they see or read a web page, they read it in a portrait mode, not landscape mode. So this is not really a problem, right? And if you look into the data, like approximately 95 to 97% will be using portrait mode anyway. So no problem. Another thing, we also like data. We like data, right? It doesn't matter. But it's really like a nice statistics, right? So how many people on average, or how many apps do people download every month on average? 0, right? So how many apps did you download this month and still use today? 1? Not 5, probably, right? So 0. Okay, that's interesting. Here's another one. 2 out of 1,000 mobile users tap share buttons. Like, the wonderful like buttons, tweet buttons, LinkedIn buttons, whatever buttons, right? No, why don't you have social share buttons? They're so important, they should be above default. Well, because people ignore them, right? Here's another thing. 90% of permission prompts, like, I would like to access your private history, your location, whatever, this kind of thing, are dismissed or ignored without even reading them, right? Well, I'm sure that most of you do that too, because we don't want to share any information. There must be a good reason for it, right? And so we like this data, and we tend to rely on things that used to work in the past. And I ask myself, where does it fit? Where does personality fit in, right? And so for us, when we started working on it, it's kind of important to look into what would make us not different, but what would give us some sort of voice in the community, right? I don't want to be neutral. I want to be hated or liked. That's a big difference. I don't want people to say, meh, whatever, right? And so just like a couple of months ago, actually, this came later, but a couple of months ago I attended a conference, and Morgan Smuller, who is a designer from Denmark, he said a couple of things which you will hear in every single conference, right? If you want to stand out today, because everybody is pretty good and decent these days, we want to be a little bit better, so we want to stand out, so we need to be better. We need to have a personality, we need to have a remarkable design. And an unprecedented attention to detail. And when I hear unprecedented, I hear or I think of websites like this. Now, can you imagine for a second, like this is a website, a datanet, which is a homage to Dada art, celebrating the 100 years of Dada art. And can you imagine for a second how much time it would take you to build it? How many resources you would need to make it work? How many iterations do we need to go through to just make it work? How much budget do you need to make it work? Now, obviously, I think that all of us will agree here that it has a personality, right? But I cannot afford it. There is no way I can do something like that over the weekend. This is just not going to happen. And he continued, this Danish guy, right? So he said, we should under-promise and over-deliver. Capture attention and guide it skillfully. On the web today, it all boils down to storytelling to create art direction. And I know it's not supposed to be a design talk, but I think it's really important because there is a fundamental difference between this app and this app. And I asked myself, why is it that if there was a service that was maybe 10 cents cheaper on average than Uber, I would jump right away? I mean, I've been using Uber for like 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. I don't have any loyalty to Uber at all. Nothing. I'm ready to jump right away. But somebody has to actively give me money, so I move away from MailChimp, because I have such a remarkable connection with them. And it's not because of the chimp. Don't get me wrong. I'm not stupid, I think. I know it's marketing, right? But it's a really good, humane marketing. I like the personality that they have. And they embed this personality and humanity into their product, which I think is very important. So they create things like this, which is a color book for children to color over. And they just distribute it on the streets for everybody. Right? Just like that. There is no button saying, hey, we're a super awesome email company, because email is boring. Who cares about email? If you try to sell email, nobody's going to buy it. But if you frame it differently, maybe it will work better. So this is what it looks like. And I think that the copy and the interface here and the wording is just remarkable, because if you look into it, hi, I'm Freddy. It's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you? How can you answer it in a negative way? Like, I'm no fun. I'm so horrible. I'm just the most horrible person in the world, right? And it keeps going and going and going and going, right? And it's just nice in a way. And then the last one, I love being me. Do you love being you? I hate myself. Like every single day I wake up and I keep hating myself, right? That's not how it works. So before I start, I want to kind of share one story, which I think is it's the story of Tijuana Flats, which is a chain of Mexican restaurants in the US. And they have 12 or so at this point. And this is the logo. And this is what they look like when you walk in. This is what it looks like. You might hate it, you might like it. It's not so important, right? But they have this kind of zombie thing, and they have a personality. I think that all of us would agree. And so they have these tall ceilings and tall walls, huge walls, and they paint them over all the time. And they are pretty big, because look at the people there, and they are pretty big, right? And so here's the thing. Every 4 weeks or so, 4 months or so, they would hire new graffiti artists to come and repaint the walls, to continue evolving that story, right? That's kind of how much they care. And of course, the menu has to reflect it. And I would argue that their website has to reflect it too, and this is their website. So you might hate it, you might like it, but I think it fits with this story. Now, in the spirit of everything we all know, that parallax is horrible, that web fonts are horrible, that performance matters, right? That we need to kind of make a wonderful, shiny, fast experience. God forbid, use textures, because textures are horrible for rendering, for browser rendering, right? They moved away from this design to this design. And I think there is a lot gone and lost between this design and the previous one. I would rather have this design reflecting the identity than this one, right? And no company knows it better than Bloomberg, because they invented in the hiring hiring designers who were given the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And they literally did whatever they wanted. And you might hate it, right? And you might not like it, and you might say it's a horrible design, but it doesn't matter, because it's a great design, because it served the purpose, because they sold tickets way faster than previous year. Right? And it just keeps going. And when was the last time you used marquee tag? Anybody? Okay, we're JavaScript people. We don't use marquee tag. That's okay. But I mean, in general, why don't we? Why don't we use eval and all the crazy stuff that we're not supposed to, just to try out, right? And even this is like the most remarkable thing that you will never forget in your life. I would take a date and timestamp right now, because this is going to change your life forever. This is the feature that they released, Bloomberg released on September 1st, dedicated to all the project Elon Musk has. Right? So this is going back in time, almost like to 1998 or so, right? Where everything is exactly not how it's supposed to be. And you might have seen some things, like some designers saying, we are in the era of brutalist design, where everything is horrible and disgusting, in a way kind of broken, because it's cool to be broken again, right? And I think that it's just a desperate attempt of many companies to be different. Right? They just want to be different, because being the same is not going to bring you anything, right? And this keeps going. You can just explore it in all its entirety. It should be in a museum somewhere. this just keeps going. So we don't need to go that way. And I asked myself, okay, so what does it mean for smashing? I don't want to create this. I don't think that this is the best way. But I thought about a few ways of doing it, and this has kind of heavily influenced everything we did on the design. One of them is, why don't we pick the most boring thing or the most annoying thing that everybody hates? Like, who likes pop-ups? Well, one person, maybe, okay? And some people who don't want to admit it publicly, that's okay. But if you think about it, what's so wrong about pop-ups? Okay, advertising, but maybe you can frame it nicely. So welcome to the most annoying and delightful and great pop-up in the world. I wish every single website had it. Every single one of them. It's so annoying, I can't stop using it, right? And I want to keep using it. And again, if it fits in, if you're smiling, you're laughing at this point, but it fits in with the personality that they have. And they can pull it off, and I'm sure that this converts fairly well. Right? And here's another one. Why don't you take something that's really boring? Now, what's more boring than the title selector? Mr., Mrs., Miss. Fantastic user experience, always. Like, it's great. It's the most remarkable thing ever, right? So why don't you try to spin it off and make it a bit more interesting? It doesn't have to be just free, and we know why they need it, basically just for spam. Right? They want to spam us at the right time or send us offers for targeting female customers and male customers. We know that. So play with it. If you really need this data, you don't need to have free. Go all the way. Right? Maybe you feel like princess today, or maybe you feel like lieutenant, I don't know, or maybe field marshal lord or something like that. And it keeps going. It's a huge list, actually. Right? So maybe you feel like a duke today. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's all cool. Like this thing can be quite kind of enough. Right, to kind of embed this personality. And even things like this. And yeah, I know it's cute, but at the same time, sometimes it's actually enough, right? And so when we started working, we kind of looked into ways of embedding this kind of personality in the community that we have. And it all started with a problem. The problem was related to one single thing. Blockers. And I know that most of you are using ad blockers, and if I ask you now, it's probably going to be like 80%, except people who lie sometimes. But I'm using it as well, and there is a good reason for it. And I don't believe in advertising anyway, in display advertising. So please do use one if you don't use yet. I can recommend you some as well. But it was a big problem for us, because of course advertising revenue. So we had a 50% revenue decline every year over the last 5 years. I remember vividly when we kind of did the last redesign, we had 12% ad blocker users. It was, not a big deal. But right now, it's 66%, which is a big deal. I mean, obviously, it's audience like you, so of course you will be using ad blocker. You're not stupid, right? But this was a problem for us because we basically were, at this point right now, we're at 1/16 in terms of revenue of what we used to have 5 years ago. So that had to kind of be solved somehow. And again, the problem is actually advertising. It's not going to work, and I don't believe in traditional display advertising anyway. So we have to find a better way, and we had to bring in this new product that we wanted to announce, but it had to become a center of everything. Right? So I don't want to kind of mention too much, but the thing is here, that's kind of what's important, is that it was this new subscription, new thing where you sign in or you sign up and you get some new features and you get Smashing TV with some webinars and things like that. And so, however, you had to be signed in everywhere. Now you need to understand the setup that we had at the time. The magazine was running for freaking 10 years at this point on WordPress. Like good old WordPress with a lot of sidelines and stuff around it, but mostly just WordPress. Now, we also had the shop, the online shop, right, which was running first on Magento, and then we moved to Shopify. And it was kind of comfortable, but at the same time, it was difficult to kind of tie it in nicely with WordPress until Shopify plugin came in. Then we also had Kirby, it's the static site generator for our Smashing Conf websites and things like that. And then we also had a job board, which was built on a custom Ruby application. So it wasn't that easy to kind of tie it in. And if we set up a new product, like the center of everything, it had to be kind of connected with everything else. So you had to connect like WordPress with Magento or Shopify and with the Ruby thing, because once you're signed in, you should get discounts on everything without having to create an account on every single platform. It would be just ridiculous. So we had to set up a new tool for the magazine, for articles, for comments, for e-commerce, for subscription service, for job board and membership authentication thing. And we had to do it from scratch. And so we got to work, we got the team, and it was a long project, and I think that these people are actually doing the work, the great work, and I'm just here presenting. They have to be here as well. But it took us a lot of time and a lot of people, to be frank, to make it work. Most front and most CSS was written by Sarah Seidan, and most JavaScript was written by Ilya Puchalski. And we also had other people, and Cat Illustrator, you will see in a second what I mean by that. And many, many, many people, and we worked with Netlify to make it all work, right? So it's like, it was an expensive project. Well, and you know, we wanted to launch for 10th anniversary last year, and we thought maybe we can launch for 11th anniversary this year. No. We launched just 2 weeks ago or so. And so I want to kind of explore exactly what we did there. And maybe just very briefly explain why. And the important thing here is that we actually started with naming components first. It was kind of one of the major things. So we started looking into the interface looking like this. This was my first mock-up. Just think about what components you need for a given page, for a given site, for a given whatever, and you write them down and you write the interface copy for it, because it defines how you're going to communicate with your customers, right? And I write down things like this, and you could even prototype micro-interactions, like, are you sure you want to delete that file, right? Yes, I'm sure, or never mind, right here, right? So you don't need to kind of, build anything at this point. You just need to figure out what you need and then name it. And specifically, I looked into error messages first. And this looks a bit weird outside of the context, but if you're in the context, it kind of makes sense. Because, well, I tried to find that personality that would be distilled in a place where it's really important. Where it's really important. For example, if you encounter an error message and something is wrong, I want to pick you up and make you smile, or kind of turn this experience into a great experience, right? And once we had error messages, we started with the typeface, and we checked this typeface for headings and body, this one for headings, and I hate it, I can't stand it. I really can't stand it. But it's really interesting, because when I started looking around and asking people what they connect smashing with, they were not saying things like professional, respected publication. They would say things like cats. And I did not want my legacy to be cats. How many of you are cat people? How many of you are dog people? Wow. That's remarkable. It's like this is the only country in the world where there are more cat people than dog people. Wow, that's just unbelievable. On average, according to my scientific study, 40% of people are dog people, 30% are cat people, and everybody else just doesn't care. But for us, it was really strange. And the reason for it, because we have all the conferences, and if you look at all the pictures, when you type in smashing, we have like 5 conferences a year, and we promote these conferences, and every conference had a cat. And when we started in 2012, I really don't like cats. I'm sorry. I really don't like cats. I think they're weird and cats, right? And this illustrator had, what if we have a cat? I said, whatever. First conference, who cares, right? And then second year, we had two cats, and then 3 cats, and so on. It kept going. So cats everywhere. It's like whenever you look, everywhere there is a cat. It's kind of sad. Or good. Depends on whether you're a cat person or not, right? So we said, okay, so what does it mean for us? We want to be professional. Should we stay professional? Should we do something else? And I said, well, it's not about me in the end. It's about how people see us. So cats, well, let's go all the way. At this point, you'll find 68 freaking cats scattered all across the interface in very different places. Now, here's the challenge for you. If you find all of them, if you do find all of them, I guarantee to book you a business class flight to any country, like to any conference, our conference in the world, with the hotel accommodation and dinner and whatever you fancy. You will not find them. 68 cats, yes. Now, you think that's easy, right? So I know, I talked to a couple of people that said, you know what? We're smart people, right? So you have no idea who you're fighting against. I'm like, try me. So they set up a machine learning algorithm that would take the cats that they found and go to every single page and try to find one and take a screenshot of it. Now, good luck with that, because some of them are written in ASCII. Some of them are written in print CSS style, which is not going to be displayed randomly. Good luck finding them, okay? So you will not find them, and if you do, please drop me a message, right? So there are many, many, many different cats, okay? And as a result, it also was important to kind of find our angle, the right angle. And the right angle for us was actually looking at our logo. And we started playing with different things and layouts and stuff, and very quickly kind of moved to this tilting. We had the logo tilted by 10.6 degrees. We did a redesign. It was tilted by 11. Big step for us, very big step for us. And everything just supposed to be tilted by 11 degrees as well. So if you look into the style guide that we built, because everything was components-based, like components first anyway, right? Kind of everything was tilted. And I just want to make a little step away from it for a second, because I was super impressed not only like by the work Airbnb did, I know it's very different, but by how far they took this idea of a pattern library, a style guide that many of you will be building today, or this, I guess, or maintaining today, where they built this thing, which is a kind of a search engine for developers and designers. So whatever you need, if you need like a workflow, specific, if you need to run tests on specific components or anything of that kind, you can just type it in. You can select the device, the page, the flows, everything you need, and then it's going to kind of give you an output, the current real-time output. So you say, I need a flow, let's say, I don't know, on iPhone 6 with a preview on iPhone 6, right, of check-in or check-out or sign up. And it gives you all the components and the overview of the real interfaces. And they took it to the next level, which they call, by the way, air shots, right? And I'm sure you've heard about them creating this bridge between Sketch and React. How many of you have seen it? This is just remarkable. And they said, let's take it to the next level. And I'm just freaking unbelievably impressed. They said, if machine learning algorithm can classify a compiler, a complex set of thousands of handwritten symbols, such as handwritten Chinese characters, with a high degree of accuracy, then we should be able to classify the 150 components within our system and teach a machine to recognize them. What the freaking hell is going on here? So here's the idea. The designer just sketches on paper. The components are already defined. So because you can just use machine learning to recognize and recognition to recognize the component, boom, React component. You sketch on paper, boom, React component. That's freaking unbelievable. Imagine the process looking like this in the future. That's just unbelievable. So we did not go so far, but it was really interesting because most things were actually built on top of those components, right? And it was all about tilting, and yeah, I just need to jump a little bit. And everything is tilted, including the form. And I have a checkbox. I don't even like cats. I'm a dog person because I know that many of you will be dog people. Don't expect a discount, but maybe something else. Right. Beside that, there was also something else that we tried, and I think it's kind of important to show it to kind of embed this personality. And this was actually emoji. I think for a second we thought maybe we could just use emoji like for cats because you want to go all the way, right? Consistent. There are too many cat emoji, and they're inconsistent, so debugging was difficult. So we did not go with it. But we could have, for example, right? But you can definitely do this. That's just fun, right? And we invested a lot, for example, in things like print style sheet. I think it's really important because I'm very lazy, so I felt it's much easier to just set up a nice print style sheet without having some sort of PDF generation. So this is another cat that you will not find otherwise, by the way. And it actually looks pretty decent. We just print it out, send it out, ship. No need for any kind of extensions, just print style sheet. And the same goes for articles, because we also had to build ebooks. And because ebooks often contain articles, and so I thought I'll just invest enough time to create a proper print style sheet so we can actually just merge all the PDFs into one. So when you print it out, you got your ebook. It looks pretty decent with all the footnotes and stuff. I'm actually kind of proud of it. It looks pretty nice. And I think it's often very forgotten, but Okay. Now let's move to the interesting part. Front-end stuff. Okay? Now, we started working on it in December 2015, and we had to look in the browser's landscape. All right? Now, obviously, we'll be looking into the good ones, or more or less good ones. Good ones, and it wasn't really a problem because it's people like you accessing the site. Right? So, are you using IE8? You don't look so. I don't think so. Right? So, this is what it looked like. And actually, right now, Firefox is at 7%, and Chrome is approximately 66%. Which means that people are not moving to Edge from Microsoft, from IE, they're moving to Chrome, and not Firefox either. And Edge is actually dropped, by the way, which is really surprising. At this point, it's kind of 0.7, 0.6 for us, which is very strange. How many of you are using Edge, by the way? like 0.0%. That's a bit sad, I think, but okay. But we also had to look into on the other side of things, right? And so it wasn't really a big problem. Right? And at this point, A11 is like 1.1%, so we don't have to worry too much about it at all. And mobile is like 2022. But the interesting thing, it's not quite entirely true, because there is one person accessing Smashing Magazine once every 2 years with the user agent Internet Explorer 666. Which I think is kind of cute, right? But it really skews my data at the end of the year, because there is one person with IE 666, which is kind of, but I appreciate the effort. That's kind of cool. Now, when we started building components, we actually followed this pyramid. Now, all of you will know the pyramid of needs, hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is coming from Patty Toland, who is working in Filament Group in Boston. And they came up with this kind of idea of what if we build responsive design according to this pyramid as well, where you take care of the speed first, like for every component and for every page, for anything that you build, take care of speed first, then accessibility, then scale, making sure it's all is beautifully responsive, like grids, breakpoints, content size, reordering things, and so on, arrangement. And then on top of it, you sprinkle it with logos, like colors and fonts and animations and stuff. And in fact, in many ways, the way we wrote CSS kind of reflects it. So it would start at the bottom, keeping it all accessible, and then taking care of responsiveness, and then adding animations and colors and things like that, right? And it was also, of course, a question of frameworks in the beginning. And we tried not to use frameworks, not because we hate frameworks, just because it didn't make sense in many ways. So you might have seen this before, right? This is how I feel using frameworks, where it's just too many unknowns, and you need to really understand what's going on behind the scenes. And we just didn't want to use something that would be too big and not really necessary, right? And in the same way, this is how we feel when using libraries, smaller libraries, where you just kind of know and find your way through it, right? And in the beginning, we thought about React, but we ended up using Preact, which is like a small subset, very small library, imitating React in many ways. And probably we would move away now from Preact to React. But the reason for it is because we had to build so much custom stuff on Preact. It just much more than we were expecting. So every single thing needs to be built on its own, which is a bit sad. I will get to it in a second. Another thing, of course, when it's all responsive and you think, well, media queries. Well, we didn't want to use media queries. And you might say, what the hell now? What did media queries do now? There's nothing wrong about media queries. And the problem with media queries is that they're difficult to maintain. Of course, even if you're using like SAS and less and stuff like that, it's always the same story, because you have 2 points, like 2 snapshots of the experience. For example, the mobile screen and the large desktop screen. And then you have to kind of converge between them, or like move from one point to another, and this is where things start breaking. So if we look like this, at the spectrum, and these slides are coming from Mike Rittmuller from Australia, who is a good friend of mine, you always end up with this kind of weird thing, where in the middle, well, you have these broken things appearing, right? Like here, for example, like navigation over here. So what do? You add a breakpoint, and then you add a breakpoint, and then you add a breakpoint, and then you add a breakpoint, and because it all refers to the browser viewport, that's kind of a problem, because then you need to revisit it next time you make some significant changes in your layout. And of course, we're using SAS and less and stuff like that. But at the same time, you still have to go through all of the media queries and fix stuff, and I don't like fixing stuff. So I thought maybe we could do something else. And this is where the idea of fluid sizing for all the components came in. Here's a question. How can you efficiently scale up and down any component? A little bit of CSS is coming your way. It's actually, you want to create this kind of library that kind of grows beautifully without you having to do anything. So there is this little trick that many of you will know, or if you at some point dealt with CSS, you will know it, of course, as well. Have a component, you have a body font size, which is defined like font size 100%, and then you have rem units, which always refer to the root element, right, to the body, or HTML. And so if you have one rem, it's always 1 times the body font size. Now, if you set the font size on the component in rem units, but everything inside of that component, all its subcomponent parts, like, for example, the padding, the border radius, and things like that, in m units, then if you scale up by increasing the font size on the root of the component, it's just going to grow up. So instead of changing every single thing in a media query, you can just say, OK, I'm going to move from font size from 75% to 100% to 125%, and it just grows accordingly. Everything inside of it grows as well. But this is just a start, because you don't want this kind of growth for a component. Like imagine H1 being very small, like 1 pixel on small screen and 500 pixels on large screen. That doesn't work. You want something a bit more controlled, right? Where it starts growing somewhere and it stops growing somewhere. And if you map breakpoints, you have a font size on the left for, let's say, for heading. You have 600 pixels, 700 pixels, 800 pixels, the viewport, right? And the designer will have a perfect typographic scale, and you can map these values, the font size values, against the viewport, right? And if you do it, you end up with something like this, but of course this linear thing, this line, kind of doesn't correctly approximate it. So you need something like this, right? And if you want to describe it, and we all like math, of course, you will do something like this. Right? There is no freaking way you can do it in CSS. You can probably do it with JavaScript, of course, but it's just ridiculous, right? But here's the idea. Why do I do it? Why do we do it in the first place? Now imagine that every single component could have a function defining its behavior. So instead of adding breakpoints every single time, just define the behavior once, and it's right on small screen, it's right on desktop screen, it's right on TV screen, it's right everywhere, because you define this behavior once, right? It might be an approximation of what you want to do, but it might be an exact approximation of what you want to achieve. So you can try to approximate it somehow by kind of breaking down into a couple of lines, and each of this line can be defined as y equals m times x plus b, and you can think about the slope and the intercept and all of this stuff, and more specifically doing this. But we don't want to do it in CSS or JavaScript, I think. Do you? No? Well, I want it. Well, it was not such a good idea. But in the end, remember, we want something very simple. How difficult is this? Let's look at it. It becomes small, and then it grows and becomes big, and it stops growing. That's the only thing we want, right? And of course, creating this kind of formula is possible, but it's just ridiculous. Now, there is a way of doing it, something similar with the font size and calc in CSS, where you have the minimum, you have a maximum, and then you define the growth, the difference between the maximum viewport and minimum viewport, and the growth. Like, if you look in here, it actually does make sense. Here you start with 16 pixels, which is the minimum. Calc allows you for basic arithmetical expressions in CSS, right? And then here define the difference between maximum and minimum, and here the area which you can grow still, right? And this is the total difference between the maximum screen size and minimum screen size. And you're kind of done. And you end up with something like this, for free. And not necessarily without media grids. You can actually still have them, and you need to maybe control it a bit better, but it just grows, and it's always right, whatever you need. And just in case you're wondering, so no reason not to use it. And we thought, what if we use it on every single thing? On every single component, be it padding, be it border, be it margin, be it width, be it height, be it everything. Including line height, for example. Right? You can imagine the same problem. You don't want an uncontrolled growth. You want to grow between two different values, from 1.3 to 1.5, for example. Exactly the same thing. You plug it in the formula, and you're kind of done. Right? And you end up with this, which just grows naturally. It becomes smaller when it's needed, becomes bigger when it's needed, and you're done. And there are two ways of doing it. And I really want to show it because I think it's kind of important. You can just set a dynamic font size on the HTML element, right, in CSS again. And then everything inside will just scale up beautifully depending on what viewport you have. Right? And if you need a fixed container inside of it, well, just define a fixed container at the bottom with the font size in pixels, and then everything inside in amps. Right? And you end up with this. Everything just scales down beautifully without any media queries at all. And the fixed container stays fixed. Or you can turn this behavior on if you say, well, let's turn fluid behavior on the fluid container in a specific way where we define it on the container, very much like in the first example I showed, and then everything else is kind of fixed in a way, right? And so this is actually what we decided to do, and the entire layout was built this way. Now, this is the layout, right? And if you look into how it grows, every single thing, the width, the height, the line space, the line height, the font size, obviously. If you look at the right upper corner, you'll find also like the SVG icon, the spacing between the SVG icon and the text, the font size of the text, the padding around the text, the border, and the logo, and everything else. It's all built this way, right? Which means that you will find a lot of magic numbers in CSS. right? But it's all calced. Like every single thing is calced. It's a bit sad, maybe, for not calc, but calc is definitely probably the most used property that we have. Okay, so that's, I think, it actually works really well and didn't require too much effort. Another thing that was also very useful is, of course, namespacing. And I know that many of you will be using sort of namespacing anyway, but it was really, really helpful for us because it's, you know, this is a quote from Harry Roberts, and he said, like, this happens to all of us. Like, as a designer or developer, you come into the CSS or you come into JavaScript and you just don't know what's happening. I don't know what this does. I don't know what else is used. I don't know if I can delete it. I don't know if I can change it. I don't know if I can use it elsewhere. I just don't know anything. So we ended up using a lot of prefixes for all kind of different components. We have like general components, like a media object, like which would be oMedia, right? But we also, everything related to layout will be prefixed with L, and then components with C, right? Like regular components. Everything related to theming will be T, and just keep going and going and going. Utilities like cliffixes and stuff like that, right? And hex too, right? It was just super helpful because once you start writing your HTML, that's just great. You know exactly what you have, and you know exactly what you're operating with. You just need to understand what the differences levels you're talking about in terms of components. Okay? And then you can also, of course, we're also using BAM, a modified, just to define relationships. And I guess that BAM is known in Russia. Although maybe not respected because of Yandex now pushing it very aggressively, but in Russia, I don't know why they do it, to be honest, because they like everywhere in Europe and in the US, they're actually quite well known. No need to push it anymore, I think. Doesn't matter, okay? Another thing that's also interesting is responsive suffixes, where you could do something like this in HTML. You can say, my goal is, I look at the code, and without looking into CSS or JavaScript, I want to know what's going on. That's my goal. Right? And if you write the class like this, say image list at small screen and a carousel at large screen, you know exactly what's happening, right? And then the only thing you need to do in CSS is to escape the @ symbol and just target it, right? That's pretty cool. That's quite useful. So we're like some code is written not by me, but some part is written by me, so it's kind of mixed at this point. And also we're using the RF classes for things that we need to refactor. Right? Because once you have an RF class, meaning it has to be refactored or it has been refactored, you can do things like this. Again, coming from Harry Roberts, you can just put an outline and say, here are all the things that we have to rebuild or that we have rebuilt. And these are all the things that we still have to rebuild. That's just incredible. It's very, very useful. Another thing that we're using as well is grid layout. How many of you have heard of CSS grid layout? Oh, all of you. How many of you have played with it somehow or knows what is possible? So we thought, let's explore what we can do. Now, when people try to sell a grid layout, although it doesn't need any selling, it's great anyway, people tend to show this picture. Like, this is grid. This is the horrible, the most annoying introduction to grid. When you look into it, it looks like it's complex. But it doesn't have to be like that at all. There are many, many simple things you can do with it as well. You can build crazy layouts like this, and Jen Simmons has a wonderful gallery of all the different things that she built with it. Oh, it's not a video. Should have been. Wait, it's really easy to do. It's like a matter of, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. And by the way, no reason not to use it, obviously, right? So there are a couple of things to know about grid, just to set the foundation right. There are grid lines, can be horizontal or vertical. There are grid tracks, which kind of is a space between two grid lines. Then there is a grid cell, and then there is a grid area. And basically, the way you define grid is by basically just setting grid template columns. And you can use different notations. For example, you can also use a repeat notation right here. You can say, I want to like here, right? We can say, I want to have 4 tracks, each 250 pixels. And there is this one like fraction unit, and one fraction is one fraction of the available space. Very much like flex grow 1 in Flexbox. Like kind of, it's not, no, it doesn't matter. You can actually think about it this way, right? And then there are a couple of things which are useful, like for example, min-max. We can say, I want to grow between 2 different values. Now let's jump into an example. So we had to build this, okay? So we have a container, and we have content in that container, and then we have a thing that breaks out. Oh, you can actually make it a bit more general like this, right? So if we want to build it, one way of doing it would be, here's our simple markup, okay? And then we got maybe image, and then what lazy developers would do is, you know, we just close the container, plug in the image, reopen the container, and go and drink. Okay? Please don't do that. That's not cool. Just in case. Just in case. Because you can do it much better. Oh, where's my mouse pointer? Here. You can do it in a much better way. Now, how exactly can we do it? Now, we can kind of try to reshape this problem in a slightly more different one. So here we've got kind of the same thing, right? Where we have 3 columns, like in a CSS grid layout. We have one on the left, one on the right, and the content area where the content lives. And the first thing we do is, of course, use add supports. Add supports, in case you don't know it, it's like a feature detection in CSS. If you ever used, or even if you are using Modernizer, you probably don't need it anymore because you can just test the things at supports. The problem is that browsers that desperately need support for add supports don't support add supports. Right? So that's kind of a problem. So for example, if you want to say dir IE, if you support, well, it doesn't understand that support. So browsers that need supporting of add supports do not support it, so you can't use add supports for them. And use not add supports, because browsers that desperately need support for not supports don't support supports. Right? So that's kind of a problem. But this works because every browser that supports add supports definitely will support, obviously, display grid as well. So you put a container on grid, display grid, and you say, OK, I'm going to define the grid template columns, my layout, right? And you can assign names to grid lines. So basically here we have 3 columns, 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's very hard to see here. No, it doesn't matter. You have 3 columns, and you can give names to lines. So if you have 3 columns, you have 4 lines. This one, this one, this one, and this one. So whenever you have 3 columns, you always have 3 plus 1. Or like whenever you have n columns, you have n plus 1 lines. You can name every line, and every line can have multiple names. So you can say, full start is going to be my first line, and then I want to grow from 1m to 1 fraction unit. Then I have the second line called main start, and the third one called main end, and the fourth one called full end. Right? And then it's like a gutter on the left and on the right. Okay? So all basically like this. Okay? And then I have a content living in the middle. Now, the only thing you need to do now in CSS to define it is to say, well, everything that lives inside of a container, in terms of the content, should go into main in here, right? And then whenever you want to break out, you just grid column full. So you just go into full, like 3 columns, and that's it. Right? So you're just scoping where the content flows, and that's it. And here's the best part. Of course it works, and it's just magic and everything. But the better part is because you don't need media queries here. Whenever you put it inside of another container that maybe has a sidebar, it will still work because it doesn't refer to the viewport. Right? So it can be as big as you want. And you can do all kinds of things with it. Okay? Which is really, really cool. And another thing that we ended up using, let me just jump in here, is of course for creating maybe something like vertical rhythm, because designers really love it for some reason sometimes. And I asked myself, how can we actually make it work? Now imagine a layout like this. All right? We have some headings, and we have some text, and we have image and stuff like this. And everything has to be aligned, properly aligned, sitting on the right lines all the time. Not like on the left, where it's all a little bit messed up, but on the right, where it's all sitting on the right place. So the way to do it would be actually very simple. So you have, again, article, h2p, h3p, and then a figure. And this is, again, the one that's breaking out. Okay? And then the way to do it is you define the fold. I'm sorry, it's a bit too much CSS, but I'm too desperately in love with CSS, I think. And here's the thing. You can use, again, you can set calc on the body. You can set like the custom CSS custom property, gutter, which is also well supported, by the way. And this is going to be the gutter between the different lines. And then the only thing you need to do, again, to name things, right? And then include grid row gap, taking that value that we defined at the root, right? And plugging it in. And the interesting thing is, and I think it's not used a lot, here I'm using the CH unit, the character unit. Because very often, designers will want to have like 60 or 70 characters per line. And break it down into 12, like divide it by 12, and then you create these tracks, each 4.85 characters. Right? And character unit actually represents the width of the character 0 in the current font, and Leah will correct me if I'm wrong.
It's correct.
Thank you. Because you don't want this, because this is not very readable, but this is better. Okay? And just in case you're wondering, of course, CH is well supported, and it's been for a long time. Right? And so you end up with this being your entire layout for the entire thing. They're just ridiculous. This is how easy CSS has become. Or difficult, depending on, you know. And then, of course, the one thing you need to do is to use the all selector. I don't know how many of you have seen this one before. It's great. So the next element and all the elements following the next element will get a margin 0, and then the content flows in this content area. And that's it. That's just ridiculous, right? And that's really cool. And so you end up with this. Without any media queries, it just all does the trick. And this is how the entire layout is built now as well, in terms of the typography and the fluidity. So if we look now into the site here, right, and you scroll down, please. You have this breaking out thing, right? Oh, by the way, this is a fun story. This thing, right, which is also part of our personality, if you like, right? No need for silly advertising at this point. We just want to thank you for sticking around. This little website wouldn't exist without you. And there is a button saying this button does nothing. This is the most clicked button. This is incredible. This button literally does, it says so, it does nothing, right? People just keep clicking on it. It's probably like the heat map for it is just ridiculous. It's like, what's wrong with us? Seriously. People just keep clicking on it. But one way or another, the entire thing, like the entire list layout at the bottom, including me, by the way, it just built this way. And there is nothing fancy going on. The only thing that you need to keep in mind, like this is the grid that you can see that in the back, right? The only thing that you have to keep in mind is that there are browsers that support ad supports, and kind of support grid, but don't support it properly. So it kind of supports ad support and supports ad display grid, but it doesn't really support display grid, although it supports ad supports. So that's kind of a problem. So you need to replace ad support display grid in H13, which creates this wonderful original interpretation of this layout, turning what you saw right now into this. Right? So you need to replace display grid at the top with grid gap 0. And then it works. Don't ask me why. And it took a lot of time to find that out. Madness. But I also want to finish by talking about something that's kind of been very, very important, I guess, and maybe even more interesting for you, which is, of course, the backend of things. I need just 5 more minutes. And some of you might have heard of Jamstack. How many of you have heard of Jamstack before? 1. That's not what I was expecting. That's OK. But the interesting thing is that you remember the platform that we were using? We were using WordPress, and everything was PHP-based. Well, except the Ruby job board, of course. And we thought, maybe we need to kind of find a way to make it all work. And in 2012, I met Matt from Netlify, who was living in Spain. He had a hosting company, and we just teamed up, and we just spoke like a lot since then. And then he co-founded this company called Netlify, which basically uses static site generators to produce content and put it to CDN, and they invested in heavily invested in a good CDN, and then they serve content from there, and that's it. And there is no server. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And he, like 2 days later, he sent me a link to a demo where he basically put some of the content of our content and our resources on Netlify CDN, and he gave it to me. I'm like, that can't be right. No, this cannot be right. But he actually pulled that off, and I thought, okay, the performance was just incredible. Now, just by moving to this stack, we improved performance 3 times. That's just, wow, that doesn't happen usually, right? And believe me, we invested a lot into making our WordPress setup fast. So that was kind of weird. But it's really interesting to see what's possible today. And we took this journey, which took us 2 years, not because we were not trying to fix it or make it work for 2 years, but just because we had so many other projects to do as well on the time. And although there are so many people involved, it was basically just me and Ilya writing CSS and JavaScript most of the time over the last year. So it wasn't like a lot of people there. So many people say for some reason that we hate WordPress. I don't hate WordPress. I just don't particularly like it. I mean, I wouldn't say I don't like it. It's okay. It's great. It's like any other tool, I guess. The only reason why we moved away from WordPress is because it wasn't, it wasn't a good fit of us at this point because we moved again, the membership was coming. So we moved away from WordPress and we moved to static site generators based setup, which is also called very often the JavaScript APIs and markup, also known as Jamstack. Now, how the hell does that work? Now, we all know this, right? How many of you are using FTP today? Except a few people who don't want to, say that. So, FTP is kind of slowly dying, but Git has been rising ever since in 2011 or so. Then we also, of course, use gulp and grunt and build tools and things like that. And we also have all these APIs that we can use on top. If you need comments, you got it. You need payments, you got it. Whatever you need, you got it. And so his idea, and he should be presenting here, not me, his idea was, okay, so in the beginning we had a browser and a server, and they would communicate, right, a long time ago. But then somebody said, no, that's not good enough. We need to have a proper program so we can run an interactive CGI bean Perl thing, right? So we can have an interactive clock and things like that. And so we're going to end up with this. And then somebody said, no. We are proper developers here, right? We need to set up a proper database and things like that. And somebody said, okay, so we can set up PHP and MySQL and Apache and make it all work and it will be great. Then somebody said, no. That's not good enough. We need to do caching for performance. So okay, so we're going to do caching. Caching makes sense, right? So you just need a bit more communication between different things. But then somebody said, no. That's not good enough. We need what? Right, I hear you correctly. CDN. We need a CDN, right? So let's do it CDN. And let's sync things, and let's do things, and eventually when things keep evolving, you need to do a couple of things on the database side of things, and security side of things, on everywhere, caching validation, CDNs, management, all of this stuff. And he said, no, maybe we can move away back to this. Have a browser and you have a CDN. You just serve straight from a CDN, so the user sees just sends requests to a CDN near them. The way it works is, well, we have our proper setup that all of you are probably using anyway. We're using Git, we're using build tools, and we're using APIs. When we push the code, we push it through the build tool. Every single thing that we have, every single article, every single comment, every single author, every single job posting, every single thing is a markdown file, right? We have a build process which basically just creates HTML out of all of this mess and adds critical CSS on top, and some other CSS as well, and some JavaScript too, and pushes it straight to a CDN. So when our users access it, well, they access it straight from a CDN, and then we enhance it with some JavaScript on top. So for example, in interactive things like search or comments, right, they're coming then on top of the setup that we have. And we were using Preact, and many people say, well, it must be horrible, not horrible, but must have some issues with the booting time. Well, no problems with booting time because it's not really a single-page application. It's a bundle of independent single-page applications, which means you don't need JavaScript to start render our pages at all. You can read articles without JavaScript at all. No need. We don't have even one blocking request. No, 0 blocking requests. Why? You come to the page, CSS is in light anyway at the top, so you just start reading. There is no need for anything, right? And we have 5 or 6 criticals at this point for different pages. So it should be coming quite fast. And then you fetch the CSS, it's going to be straight in the cache, and then and service workers cache as well. And of course, it's also a progressive web app, although everything is a progressive web app these days, in a way, if you're building today, I guess. And this is the stack, basically, quite simple. There's nothing too fancy going on. We built a lot of microservices, a lot of APIs to make it all work. But it's all this is it, right? So all the stuff is living on GitHub. So we have staging, we have master. Whenever we push to master, continuous deployment, and here we go, it goes live. There's nothing fancy going on there. No database in the back. Of course, we have membership authentication and this kind of thing. We're using Stripe for payments, right? And we're using some Go setup for backend for things like when you want for the back order things, like back office things, right? And I was very impressed by the speed. This was just unbelievable. The Jamstack. It's actually probably maybe one of the first projects of that scale that moved to Jamstack, and I think I'm really happy that we actually pulled it off. I was not expecting that to happen. Yeah, and we're also using Hugo as a static site generator, just in case you're wondering. We're using Webpack, and we're using Gulp and Grunt because we need different plugins. It's just ridiculous. I can show you the build process if you want. And I'm very happy about one thing, that all the things that we were building over the last 2 years, which is why it took so much time, right? We had to build the CMS. I mean, not we, Netlify, but we had to work on the CMS. They have built a GoTel for us, for Commons. They have built a GoTrue for authentication. They built GoJoin for Stripe subscription. They built GoCommerce for the entire Shopify replacement. And they built also Gociator for API gateway for JSON Web Tokens for also authentications. So it was kind of journey, right? And it's interesting that many people think that it's heavily dependent on JavaScript. We have too many dependencies. We don't really. I mean, you can access everything without JavaScript at all. And if you need something without JavaScript for some reason, or if JavaScript is slow, or whatever, you still get all the fallbacks, except for comments right now. For comments, if you don't have JavaScript, for example, it's very slow, you don't see the comments. That's something we still have to work on. We can just pull it maybe from, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. But if you start searching, right, and you don't have JavaScript yet, we just move you to Google. By default, it's Google. Right? And then we enhance it with JavaScript, and then we have a live search, right? And checkout, no. At this point, it doesn't work without JavaScript, which is, I guess, yeah, we'll talk about later. Yeah, performance, the main thing that really helped us was dealing with web fonts, what I mentioned yesterday. That was like a real performance hit, performance improvement. We saved 600 milliseconds on it alone. That's a big deal. For responsive images, we're sometimes using Picture Element in all the legacy articles, but we're also using Cloudinary as a service. And then we're using Preload, and we're using Zopli, Brotli, and Gzip as well. And critical CSS, not server push anymore at this point for now. And deployment, at this point, just one bundle, but we're moving to 8 to 10 bundles. And maybe just to show it to you, now, this is what CMS looks like. It's in no way it can be connected. It's similar to WordPress. Of course, it's much worse than WordPress, right? But it does the job for us. And the best part about it, that we have everything in one place. So you have authors, jobs, events, talks, workshops, speakers, and so on. It's just custom built, obviously, right? So that works pretty well for us. And the performance was kind of ridiculous in a way. Now, this is like from, I don't know, half a year ago, before we actually started doing any kind of optimizations at all. There was nothing, we didn't do anything for web fonts, for example. And we started render under 700 milliseconds. Right now, I mean, I don't know what needs to happen, but usually we start render on a stable connection under 0.5 seconds. Try that with any kind of WordPress database setup. That's just not going to happen. So, still have some stuff to do, but it's live. People hate red. We can talk about it. We still have to do some work, but you can go and check it out. There are many hidden gems, and I just want to show you one to finish it off. Just let me see. For example, now if you get, let's say, like a book of stuff, right? Some of you will, of course, know that there is this coupon code thing. And of course, when you don't have a coupon code, but you want to buy, what do? You start Googling for a coupon code, right? How many of you do it? Okay, we're all here in Moscow and Russia, so of course we do. So here's the thing, I know, and I tested. I mean, I've been working a lot in e-commerce, and I've been testing it a lot heavily. I tested a lot, like everything related to coupon code. So here's the deal. There are different options of how we can improve conversion. And conversion meaning like the amount of money we're getting on a Monday by the end of the day. Like on a random Monday, not just a holiday Monday, just a Monday. So there are different options. You can say, okay, whatever you type in is just going to work. Right? That's to improve conversion. Or you can say, okay, I'm going to dedicate, it's like set up a single page that has all the coupon codes, things like that. The problem is you can also add things to all those coupon farms, and we know from our experience, don't we? Whenever you try coupon code from a coupon farm, there is maybe 10% chance it's going to work, right? Maybe even less than that, depends where. And I thought, I mean, we cannot afford just giving $10 discount on a coupon farm code thing, right? So it's like, I mean, you wouldn't set up a coupon code for $1. It's just ridiculous, right? So I thought, maybe we can just submit an invalid coupon code. And you think, what the hell is going on here? Why is he talking about coupons all the way? Now, the reason for it is this. I just want to give you a little hint. If you want to save money, and I think you do, because we all want that. So let's imagine you found a crazy, weird coupon code on Google. Type in and click cash in. Oh, damn it, that's the right one. Damn it. Okay, just because I like ice cream so much, I'm sorry. I have to move it away. You've never seen that. You haven't seen that. Let's imagine you found ice cream 15. Okay, it says, this code looks fishy. What if you try fish instead? Interesting, so let's try fish instead. So you save 1%. Now this is the interesting part. People who discover it, there is no way they're not going to buy. They're going to go to the neighbor to ask for the credit card if needs to, because they don't know what's going to happen next when they actually go through the entire thing. Because you might have seen this here as well. Just because you can, because we're expecting newsletters and kind of stuff. So this is kind of a way for you to save money. At least we're losing 1% here, but 1% is much less than $10, right? So this in mind, yes, I just want to finish off here by saying this was a long journey. There are many things that we can still talk about in discussion later outside. But most of the time, it was just a lot of fun because we could play with all the fancy technologies. And actually looking into what we can do today, I'm just really happy that we're living in this wonderful world. And we should actually just enjoy it. So this in mind, meow, and thanks for coming.